Tonight we're going to be talking about minions and how they make your combats feel more epic.
And skill challenges and how you can use them to develop a more creative role-playing experience.
And we'll end with the somber note of character death and its impact on your players and story. The coffee's brewed. The day is at its end. This is Steve.
And John. Pull up a chair, break out your dice, and join us for the very first episode of
The BullCritter's Corner. You've been exploring a cave. Thus far, nothing. You find yourself in an empty burial chamber. Someone makes some form of noise, dropping a metal object down a well.
Clink.
The sounds of creatures swarming from the deep belows begins to echo through the halls. The only thought the party has is to seal the doors. Moments later, a rush of goblins bursts through the door, soon followed by an ogre. As the fight begins, the characters are cutting through goblins left and right. One by one they drop until finally all that's left is the party and your ogre. So, minions. What are they?
Well, I ran 4th Ed for a short bit before all my players didn't want to play it anymore. And for me, what I know about minions, they're 1 hit point creatures. They have the same attacks of creatures of similar challenge rating level, like difficulty level. They are meant to be felled, and you can put a bunch of them on the battlefield at one time. So you can have a battle be larger than it looks like, or you can do other fascinating things with minions.
Alright, so you covered that minions were a concept that was created for 4th edition. And in the 4th edition, they definitely served as a filler role because the powers in that particular edition were more extravagant and also worked really well off of a linking concept.
A lot of push-pull.
A lot of movement-based situations, which was really cool. And the minions also allowed you to set up encounters that had a more dynamic flow because there were enemies that, although they represented a threat, also were easily dispatched.
Yeah, and so if you wanted to put a boss fight or something like that, and you don't want to wear your party out, you can have a couple battles with only a few real challenge ratings and minion, or there's a bunch of different ways you can disperse them through. But in your opinion, what are their best uses?
Alright, so their best uses, there's a few areas that I think they really key in as being super fantastic. One of them is if you're doing multiple encounters through a session, they give you a resource that won't completely deplete your party like a full-powered creature would, but it's a good way to begin breaking down the hit points and abilities that are available on your players. The other thing it allows you to do, the second option and second thought I have, is for your boss encounters, your major fight. A lot of times in D&D, I can't really translate it to other systems, but in D&D, when you present one single big creature versus a group of 4, 5, maybe even 6 players, the action economy of the players becomes so
Overbalanced.
Overbalanced, that's a good word. That fight ends up being 2, maybe 3 turns, and that really isn't enough time for most big creatures to really get rolling on the things they can do. The addition of 5, maybe 6 minion creatures all of a sudden gives the party a need to focus their attentions. I'd say even better would be to present the boss as a single creature on the first turn, and then at the end of the first turn, you add 5 or 6 minions that are coming from the flank. That way now you have a threat on both sides, or maybe they're coming from opposite sides. But when you suddenly add this extra shift to the dynamic of the battlefield, it completely changes the perspective that the players are seeing and how they react. If you can use those minions to almost create panic in your players, where although it's not a great thing for you to have them force them to make mistakes, when they start feeling panic, mistakes happen. It can lead to a more interesting fight all in all.
So I was thinking of other fighting like tactics games just now, and I was like, oh, you know what a good way to use a minion would be to say split the combat into two sections. Like say the you have to get this person before the goblins run off with them, and then the goblin boss is over here on the other side of the map with his goblin minions as well. So you can have a mid-level creature, a mid-level challenge creature here with a couple minions around him for this feature of the combat, and so you can actually split your party out and still make it possible not to kill your party off while it's split, so you can turn these combats into even more like multiple facets.
I like where you're going with the idea. Let me give it a little more depth.
Okay, yeah.
All right. So you have to save the person who's been captured by, let's say, goblins. We like using goblins for example.
Yeah, at least tonight.
But the goblins have a dungeon with a shifting wall. Kind of like a Scooby-Doo secret wall where, if you're standing on the platform, it takes you to a separate room. So you can have a room with one moderate creature and 2 or 3 minions, and then, like you said, the big creature with the minions in the other room. And now, because the players don't know what is activating the shift, all of a sudden you can split your party, even if it's just one character that gets pulled away into the other room. Neither encounter is so powerful or so overbearing that it can kill anyone outright, but it still helps build the drama and the tension of the moment.
Yeah, well, if you split off one character, I'd say that you have to, you might want to tailor exactly what it is that they encounter. Something like a wizard, someone with AoE and that would use AoE as a default would be able to get by really easy. But say like a fighter, well, even if a fighter had cleave, you could go through the first 3 minions in round 1, and then it's just 1-on-1. And it makes that person feel like you were saying earlier, it does bring an epicness to it. Because it was like, I was solo against 4. Round 1, I dropped 3. No sweat. And then I looked at you know what I mean? And so, it gives them that edge a little bit sometimes. I like
it certainly gives the edge, but it also presents this moment where, because like you said, he's killed 3 enemies in his first swing, it's a moment that even 4 or 5 months down the road, even though they've had other interesting things happen, the epicness of that moment where he kills the 3 goblins and then he mano-a-mano the hobgoblin, saving the person who's going to be sacrificed while the rest of the party were dealing with the problem outside. They will all remember that. On top of the memory of it, it also builds this opportunity within the story where maybe the rest of the party members, even though they're equal strengths, will generally look to him in a situation where someone might have to break off from the party and go, but you remember Rick? Rick is the guy who went into the room and he whacked those 3 goblins. He saved the prisoner. It builds this moment.
It's like something that you can bard out through your world sometimes, maybe.
Definitely.
One of the things that we were talking about before we got down to sit to record was like how you can take minions and disperse them through a combat as well. Not just to split the combat, but the front line of goblins. And in the back row you have different goblins, different features, whether it be like AoE mage. Like in the traditional sense, what you would do as a DM most likely is I want to put my frontliners in the front, and I'm going to have these mage and 2 archers in the back, and that's who's going to annoy the party. But with the minions, you can actually not just put those generic things, you can add these little mini features onto them, and you can make it so that even though they are this threat that really could, destroy the party, they also have a health range that allows the party to both feel like they're under pressure from that range, and they are still engaged in the combat in the front line, because those are real creatures up there.
My thought process on this one, again, we're using goblins, is having the front line of goblins literally act like a shield wall. So where normally you would expect those creatures to attack, my thought process was they take an action so they're harder to hit. In 5th edition, it's taking the dodge action, which adds essentially almost 2 armor class. No, it makes the enemy have disadvantage on their attack. And instead of being there to poke at the enemy, they're literally there to keep the enemies away from the people behind them. And then I presented the idea perhaps one of the ranged minions has a lasso. So now you use that one with the lasso to grab one of those squishier back-end targets, the cleric, the wizard, the sorcerer, something like that, and use that as an ability to drag him into that front line of people who weren't attacking, who were just being defensive. But the moment someone squishy, someone very easy to hit, suddenly presents themselves, they jump on it.
Yeah, you've created a new tactic for combat that makes it a bit more dynamic than it would be if it's just some of the flat creatures that you can find. Because there are creatures that do that. They like pull creatures towards the other squares and things. There are creatures that have those abilities, but the goblin does not. And if I want to have that with goblins, instead of just going, well, I'm going to add this other creature and try to find a reason in my world that they have this, I can adapt the goblins that I have in order to do that.
Exactly. And by giving them this small mechanical change, not only does it make the fight more dynamic, but it also breaks this situation where the players have this rote knowledge of what's in the book, and they go, well, I know a goblin can throw a javelin, and it's at a +4, and I know he swings a light mace, and it's at a +4 or +3, and they generally do 1d8 damage or 1d6 damage, and it suddenly takes players, especially experienced ones that unfortunately have read the Monsters Manual or have fought these creatures enough times that they have a base of knowledge, and suddenly it shakes the entire foundation of their knowledge base.
Yeah, they have unexpected gain, they're not stuck in this road. Okay, well, I know I'm going into here, and I'm going to move 10 foot this way, and then I got to watch out for that thing. Okay, hey guys, there's that's the mage, so we know automatically, let's just pound it to death. Well, in my instance, yeah, okay, there is a mage, and yeah, he's kind of a threat, but this utility over here that can, paralyze each person for one turn, well, you didn't take care of that. That's a big problem.
Now, your mentioning of the mage is an interesting point. Let's say you don't want the players to have this sudden idea, okay, well, there's a person in the back with robes and he's got a book. We know that's the wizard. Instead, you do this thing with the minions, and instead of having them have a wizard, maybe the one of the goblins, one of the ranged ones, just happens to have a firebomb. He can only use it once, but now you have an enemy that has a fireball, essentially, but it doesn't mechanically work in any of the ways a fireball does in the context of they know he has it, or it can be counterspelled or anything like that.
Yeah, he has an ability or an item that gives him something akin to fireball, and it might even make the people think, oh, that's the guy that we need to attack, but really it was just he just blew everything that he had right there.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just a one-time use ability. This is actually another concept we're stealing from 4th edition. The minions in 4th edition had little quirky abilities like this, but almost all of the creatures had them. And it presents this opportunity for you to present a threat that the players don't have an effective answer to because they've never encountered it before.
Yeah, so they have to come up with something that keeps them on their toes. Livens up the combat when it's turned into a slog of just move forward 30 feet attack, move forward 10 feet attack, move forward 10 feet attack.
Definitely. And the other side of that is it gives you the role-playing benefit of now they're looking for the creature that has the clay pot with the red paint on it. Maybe they're like, oh, we need to target him first because we know he can throw a fireball, or even, let's go even further with this, maybe they want to try and kill him without breaking the pot, so they have a one-time use of it. And as a DM, when players start doing things like that, some people shy away from it. They go, no, I don't want to give them this free use fireball. But for me now, in my current mindset, I'm like, if you guys can creatively do it, this adds another layer of this epicness that we were talking about back to the game. It breathes. Yeah. It's a breath of life. They
stole their own, thing. Oh my God, they can. How would they respond to that? Oh my God, they can do the same things we can do. Run. But that brings that to a good point of how to integrate them in the game and how to keep that balance, because giving somebody a one-time use fireball that can be used by almost any player, is something that could unbalance the game if you're doing it at the wrong time or the wrong level or the wrong...
Certainly. In that regard, any ability you give those creatures, you have to consider first off, if it's an item that is giving them the ability, your players are going to attempt to steal it. So oftentimes, you don't necessarily want it to be an item. My first example was the lassoing goblin. Although it's an item, maybe it's just that his training gave him the ability to do it the way he did. So it's something that even if they have the item, they can't replicate. But at the same time, for the fireball, all we're really talking about is an enhanced alchemist fire.
Yeah.
So if you feel it's unbalanced to throw at your players,
you probably shouldn't.
Then you probably shouldn't be throwing it at your players because
If you feel it's unbalanced for them to throw, for them to throw it back at you, then it's probably unbalanced to throw at them.
Yeah. Now, again, there are times where there are things that the monsters will be able to do that the players just don't have the access to. Maybe you make a minion that has a once per day animal shape or something, and although that could be unbalancing or strange, once you've hit the players with enough of this strange stuff so they stop thinking about just what's in the books, they just get into the story. And if you explain a way in the story for that creature to have that ability, what does it matter?
Yeah, but as long as it doesn't turn into like a Super Mario world where every single person has some kind of themed thing going on. If there's a reason for that themed thing because you paid for it, in your story and your world building, then it just fades into it's just a dynamic part of the setting. Like, you'd see the same things happen in modules all the time.
Certainly. From a conversation, I think last night, I had presented the idea of iron bark trees or ironwood trees, and the idea of using the syrup as a component to make bark skin. Today I thought even further on it. I was like, well, why not have it so if you drink that particular syrup, you get like a diminutive version of bark skin.
You're starting to slide from that rules lawyer to the rules of cool, sir. You're making up stuff that does spells.
Why not?
So that would be how you would try to integrate these minions, I'm assuming. Like, at least a part of it. What you do is you go, hey, what are some of the abilities that monsters at this CR level already bring to the table? Can I shift them from monsters that aren't this monster type or in this area of my world? And instead of explaining it by having some far-fetched story plot that I haven't really put a lot of work into, I actually go, no, it isn't a goblin that went and somehow hired or tamed, or this abyssal creature didn't randomly just pop up in this cave here. No, I'm going to take this abyssal creature's a couple of its things, its flavors, and I'm going to take it to a goblin. What is it? Oh, it's a goblin cultist.
It's a goblin cultist, or maybe it's that particular familial line of goblins have somehow interbred with demons or devils, or whatever creature it is. And again, most of the time your players, even if they think an ability is cool, they won't dig to find out why. But if you have one wily player who just won't let something go, having an answer before the question is asked is always better than waiting until the question is asked and then trying to pull something out of your butt.
And it took 5 seconds to come up with cultist. He's an occultist for abyssal horror, and that's what he does, and because of that, the abyssal horror has bestowed some abilities on him. He pretty much is a warlock.
Essentially, that would be like an NPC warlock, and that's a great example. And if you have a player who decides to pursue, why was this guy able to cast Witch Bolt or Eldritch Blast, or why was this particular goblin able to turn into a wolf? If you have your answer beforehand, then you can just roll it out to them, and it feels a lot more natural than having a question stump you for a second where you just stop and you're like, crap, I have to come up with an answer.
And not to confuse anybody, this is still about minions, because the beautiful thing about that is, I've got this creature that does something cool, and it is going to hurt if it hits over and over again. It has 1 HP. Yeah. It dies upon engagement. So that means you get to add the flare, pace it when you're going through your dungeon or you're going through a series of encounters. Like you said before too, is you get to decide, oh man, this is way too easy for them. I'm going to take this 1 HP minion, and I'm going to put it at 35 HP now, because that's where I need it to be to last 2 more rounds in order to actually be a challenge of any sort.
That is part of the trickery of being a DM. And I hate using the word trickery, but some of it really is kind of a sleight-of-hand trickery. Since the players don't know everything, which is the most important part, they don't know everything. They couldn't have said before the combat started, oh, those are all minions. If they get into the mindset where everything's minions, you have to break them of that.
And that's another reason why they can feel epic, because if they go through a mirror Scooby-Doo thing and they kill 3 guys, they don't know those 3 characters were minions.
No, they have,
no reason to make the assumption if you put in minions and normal creatures dispersed And you don't overuse the minion. Use it as a sprinkle to the game.
Definitely. It is the sprinkle, and although there are some people out there that love a giant mound of sprinkles, most people prefer a sprinkling of them.
Yeah, a small amount.
But talking about minions and integrating them or balancing them, there's also running them in your game. And your game doesn't have to be D&D. Our focus right now is talking about D&D because that's where the concept came from.
Yeah, 4th Ed minion systems.
Let's say you're playing a White Wolf game. Maybe you just want to have some humans that just fall off very easily when your werewolf or your vampire, even your hunter, engages them. Do it. Make it, if they hit them one time, they're down. You don't even necessarily have to say they're dead. Take it over to Star Wars. The heroes of that story killed tons of minions. They're called stormtroopers.
So D20 Star Wars has stormtroopers as a CR'd creature. And they tier them up and have different types of stormtroopers, etc. in their version of the monster manual. But minions still work. Because you can still add unique troopers that have features of other things in that system's game. In that system's world. And add it to add flair in a theme or a feel to that battle that's more engaging.
Sure, you went to the D20 Star Wars, but then you can use it in the D6 Star Wars or the most recent one that came out that has all the weird, crazy story dice.
I have not seen that.
It's a really cool one. We'll talk about it another time, but
I have got to check that out.
You can use it in any of those systems. For Star Trek, you can imagine that most of the base crew of a ship could be minions. Be that a Klingon ship, a Federation ship, a Romulan ship. Minions. Lord of the Rings, in the early encounters for the adventurers, the main characters, you'd see when they fought the Orokai the first time, there was this period where it would be a few exchanges on the screen. Then you get to something like Helm's Deep, and they're just counting off the numbers as they're running through them.
Yeah, at the end of the Hobbit, that battle. Like I won't never forget the cartoon. They come in from every side, huge legions. You could do that. You could do something that epic. There's supposed to be a battle, and and we already know that there's rules for large battle. But if you don't want to engage those rules of large battle, you can still make it feel like that without having to have all that extra mechanical slog.
Definitely.
By adding it with minions.
Definitely. So, we've talked about minions and their uses and how to integrate them in their game. And those are a great tool for a DM to have in his tool belt. But that tool belt has to have lots of tools in it, right? Another really interesting tool that 4th edition presented was skill challenges. And they're a fantastic thing. But the skill challenges is a very simple concept that I think they overproduced inside of the book, because at the time that I read it, it confused me as a DM, and it left a sour taste in my mouth. Coming back to it now, I see it as this great tool to fill out very dull moments in the game as one option. Another great use is to make a heist or a chase seem very interesting, because sometimes going through the steps in a slower process can be very mundane almost. And when you do it in a skill challenge, that doesn't happen that way. But I keep saying skill challenge, and I've yet to tell you what it is. A skill challenge, the way 4th edition presents it, is a moment where you say to your players, you have entered into a skill challenge. You set the environment of that challenge, and then you ask them how they would like to proceed using the skills their characters are proficient in.
Anything that takes a period of time or a series of steps.
Sure, anything that takes a period of time or a series of steps. Generally, you would want to use it to build drama. It's an opportunity to enhance something that otherwise would take a lot of time. It could be kind of boring. Now, there are moments at a table where you have slow times, where people want to go shopping or something. That's not what this is for. This is for, let's go to the chase. If you do a chase following the thought process of movement speed, if you have a 30-foot movement speed and I have a 30-foot movement speed, and you're 15 feet ahead of me, by the rules, you'll always be 15 feet ahead of me. And as a DM, you might go, oh, well, we'll roll it out, and eventually the Constitution, that's boring. And that doesn't feel like a movie moment. When was the last time you saw Bond just run until he got tired?
Yeah. A Lethal Weapon where they just drove for 20 minutes.
Yeah, that wouldn't be fun. So instead, you go, okay, we're doing a chase. This is a perfect opportunity for us to go into a skill challenge. And then you go to the players and you say, we're entering a skill challenge. At this moment, think of the skills you're proficient in. Of those skills, how is this going to help you achieve your goal? And then, your players they'll probably take a minute the first couple of times you do this to them, because essentially you're just opening the floor to unfiltered creativity.
During the chase, each player, the way the skill challenge works, gets a chance to use a skill in trying to forward or progress whatever it is. So like in a chase, goals. It would be, to slow down the enemy or to find a way to take a shortcut or whatever that could be.
Definitely.
And what it does is, if you really give everybody a sense, they actually get this place where they get to look at their skills. And if it's a wallflower, somebody that doesn't roleplay, that's, like you've said it before, it brings them out. It gets them to actually think, how could I use any of the skills on my list in this situation to do something cool?
It certainly can do that. And the first couple of times, it'll likely be the other players looking at the skills that particular wallflowering character has and giving them suggestions on how to use them. But once those seeds have been planted, most of the time, you'll start to see growth. You'll start to see this person formulating ideas of their own, and that's when things get really interesting.
Yeah, you start to bring them out of their shell of role-playing and get them to realize that they have a bit more options of their own that they can do during this. When I think of it, I usually don't think of it in forms of chase or travel. Like, that's something that I actually hadn't thought of skill challenges in the sense of yet. What I think of them as political intrigue. Like, if I wanted to do a city, I want to do political intrigue. So instead of having the characters have to go, well, I'm going to go through the town and look for, Thieves Guild. Well, you have a scaffolding built. And usually you have that built, at least in some sense, when you built your city. Like, this is the dynamic of the ruling or whatever it is. This is the political intrigue that could be found there in a very, open sense as a DM. This gives you the scaffolding, I think.
I think in that scenario, and it's a great use for the political intrigue, also for a bank robbery or a heist of an important person's house. But before you use it in that way, I think you do need a portion of role-playing where those players at least make some form of contact with some of those assets they're going to attempt to use. Maybe 3 sessions ago, 5 sessions ago, hell, sometime in the past while they were in the town, they made some form of a minor contact, or maybe even a major contact in the Thieves Guild. So that way it's an extra card in their deck that they can pull out with a conjuncted skill to use in that particular scenario.
So you mean so you would want the introduction to these pieces of the world to be in a role-playing, scenario, and the skill check mechanic would be more for accessing these things rather than the first time you're introducing the characters are revealing these resources.
I think for certain situations, yes. You mentioned a Thieves Guild. Certainly, there are skills you could use that could influence or encourage to work for you a Thieves Guild. But wouldn't it be more interesting if the players some time ago made that connection to the Thieves Guild? Now they're entering into this city to commit to a heist. And one of them goes, well, can I use my contact to the Thieves Guild and then make a stealth roll to have one of those thieves help me scout out the area? Or something to that effect. It works both ways, but when you already have this pre-established connection to the group, all of a sudden you go, I'm going to make that roll easier for you. Or maybe if that Thieves Guild happens to be opposed to the thing they're trying to do, but they're not aware of it, it makes the roll significantly more difficult, possibly even an automatic failure.
Okay, so you set up different DCs, and you make those DCs of either, an easy difficulty, or moderate, or hard. And those DC ranges for the access you're giving your characters, you know that, like, when the skill challenge is rolled, which, based on what they said they want to do, what that difficulty is going to be. But there's certain things that trigger, like, automatic failure. Like, I had an example with you before with a bank heist in a modern setting, and for mine, you could go to the bank manager, but if you were to personally intimidate the bank manager, automatically you would fail because there's a backstory that says that he's actually hard to intimidate because he works with the mafia. So I automatically know, if they try to intimidate, automatically they get a failure for this.
There
or
are
automatic combat.
There are effects that you can definitely seed throughout your perceived skill challenge, depending on if it's something you've taken more time to set up, or if it's something you've kind of just come across a situation where you need a skill challenge. I would not personally add a bunch of auto failures, because the dice already kind of give you this range of what could or could not happen. But again, like your example with the bank manager being tied to a criminal organization, that definitely, to me, would read, this should be an automatic failure. So I'm going to, in my notes, list it as possible failure, no matter what's rolled. But then your players, the creativity of your players is always going to surprise you.
In my session, right, so instead of intimidating, because my view when I set that up was, if they try to come in and say, hey, we're going to beat you up if you have some, term or the other, like, unless you take us to the vault to get the dossier we need. I believe that was the target. So instead of doing that, the player goes ahead and says, I'm going to kidnap the wife, and then I'm going to show them a video of her that we have, and I'm going to use that. And it's like, okay, well, that's a different connection there. And the player investigated whether or not he and his wife had a good and loving relationship, like if she'd actually be a valuable asset to use against him. And just because of how unique the idea that was compared to what I thought it was going to play out, I was able to then go, okay, you know what, this isn't an automatic failure anymore. This is a different way of using this than I interpreted. I'm going to go ahead and say, let's roll this out and make it a moderate roll.
And I think that's that dynamic level that, as a DM, you need to keep. If you hardline everything, things become very mechanical, and it kind of sucks the fun out of something that's supposed to be very fun. It's supposed to be very open. In one of the examples I presented to you last night, I told you it was a moderate challenge, so it needed 9 successes. But in my notes, I also wrote, after 3 successes, we're changing the scene. You started in the sewers, and after you achieved 3 successes going through the skill challenge, all of a sudden you found yourself in the back streets of a large city. And then, after you made the successes there, the idea was if you had a certain number of failures, you would also have to continue the skill challenge out into the forest, trying to escape the pursuing guards. You didn't achieve enough failures for that to happen, and you were able to get to the gates with an unalerted set of guards, and they just were like, go away, get out of here, we don't really care who you are.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So skill challenges can be failed, but if every time a skill challenge fails, it ends in, like, immediate combat, it kind of turns into what the skill challenge was designed in 4th Ed, which is an encounter.
Sure.
But at the same time, by opening up other role-playing, well, now we're going to move into the forest. You've got enough failures, and now what you're doing is you're in the forest, and now if you don't complete enough successes before this forest thing is done, what ends up happening is we're going into combat.
It could be that. The other side of that is perhaps throughout the entire process you achieved enough failures, and instead of having a combat consequence, the guards have enough of a visual of your characters that now you're considered criminals, wanted, dead or alive, in the city. Or if your situation was big enough, maybe an entire country. And that makes role-playing in the area that you're in interesting. It brings a new dynamic to the table that, again, it just livens up the setting.
Yeah, it gives stakes that aren't combat and death related, and a lot of players don't feel any stakes except for will my character die in this situation. They don't get a lot of that extra, well, there was a consequence to this actual skill challenge or encounter that ends up leading to this world shift.
Sure. Another idea I had mentioned before travel. So I'm going to use two examples, ocean-based travel and a forest-based travel. Let's say that the moment you begin both of these settings, you're undersupplied. So your failures in either scenario, be it running out of drinkable water or good drinkable water, might be that the players come out of the end with a disease or maybe levels of exhaustion. For the forest, it could be anything from exhaustion to parasites to happening upon an encounter to possibly being so lost.
Poisoned.
Poison. I mean, the varieties of consequence for failure are definitely very wide.
Especially on things like we're moving across this mountain range. Hey, we're going to break this down into a skill challenge, actually, on how we're going to get across this mountain range.
Sure.
Oh, you guys actually got so many fails on the skill challenge for crossing this mountain range to save you, 2 months of travel time. What ends up happening is now we're going into a phase where you guys have exhaustion. You guys have real problems. And so now when you come out of the other side of that mountain and I tell it, your DM tells you, oh, well, you got 2 weeks until you're going to be able to show up at the nearest town that you know of on a map. For 2 weeks of travel time, if I put a combat encounter in there, or anything I do, like the tension is already increased from there, like we're already down. Anything we run into might be able to kill us. Because that tension is increased, I can play, or the DM can play so much more with the party.
Certainly, and for story purposes, anything that increases the drama, be it a stress like exhaustion or starvation, or just physical combat, any of that heightens the response to the game if your players are actually in it and aren't just regarding it as character sheets.
And that's another thing, too, is, if they're already in hack and slash mindset solely, this really won't get through to them much. This is just one more. This is like a way that you could present it as a hack and slash almost, just to get them to engage more with the role-playing aspect of it.
Sure.
What you just said made me think what that is a way to incorporate starvation, exhaustion, and all of those mechanics in the game where you might not even be running food and rations. You might not actually be running encumbrance in your game. So you never really come across things like starvation or exhaustion and their effects. So when you do it through this role-playing sense and you're able to go, actually, no, you guys ran out of it, you are exhausted through this actual role-playing event, you get to intersperse that in without having to use all the heavy mechanics that come with that system.
Sure. That's actually an interesting point. And when you bring it up, a lot of DMs, me included, we tell our players, make sure you have rations. But then I never ask you, did you take off your rations for today?
It seems like, you're already handling so many things, right? As a DM, it seems like it's just one more thing. And, people are going to fudge, maybe easier, I don't know. They feel less guilty for fudging one ration.
Yeah.
I didn't get to it, whatever.
The ration thing seems to be fudged a lot. And again, from my side of it, it's something that unless we're going into like a desert or a barren mountain or a plagued land area where there wouldn't be food readily available, usually I have at least one player in the group that has the survival skill. And my mindset on it is, well, we have someone with survival. Realistically, they could probably scrounge up some mushrooms and something and at least put some food in people's bellies. Whatever, right?
Yeah, it's enough to feed them and get them by. Nobody starves. Nobody ever reaches exhaustion. I think even Pathfinder in that game, for the Pathfinder system, can't you assign somebody to hunt, and they get your food?
You could. I do have to say, though, again, although I don't worry about rations, I think almost every game I've run, at some point while you guys are traveling through a forest, one of you will happen upon a large bear or a large elk, or maybe I'll just describe that there are some deer, and all of a sudden one person will be like, we need to kill that thing so we have smoked meat. Because. And all of them, at the time, all of them have rations. So I just go, okay. And then for the next 4 months of in-game time, they're hauling around an extra 20 or 30 pounds of smoked meat.
And they don't do anything with it.
They never do.
They never even write it off their sheet.
But it's this thing. I have had a moment where the smoked meat was actually used.
Sold?
No, not sold. I presented a scenario where they came across this altar in the middle of a elven forest that requested a sacrifice of a personal item or something. It wasn't personal item.
Like you put personal time into? Or
yeah, something like that. And the player carrying the 20 pounds of meat, like everyone else gave an item, but was having this trouble going through their inventory. And he was like, they want something that I invested time into. I took the time to hunt the deer. I took the time to skin the deer. I made the party wait an extra 16 hours for me to smoke all of this meat. I'm going to give up the meat. I was like, that's perfect. It accepts it. You're allowed to pass. And the idea was if they didn't all give something, it didn't really matter what the something was ultimately, but as long as all of them gave something, the tree behind it wouldn't become active and beat the crap out of them. It was a treant whose whole purpose was to stop people who weren't willing to give something. And it's really hard to get your players, even if they got a bunch of junk in their bag.
If the treant doesn't eat meat, then he doesn't know it's rotten. He's like, yeah.
Good point.
Good. Big pile of meat. I can't smell anyway.
But coming back to skill challenges, we like to go off on tangents, you and I. We've talked about kind of what they are and some of the areas you can use them. The more interesting part is for the bigger ones, the really interesting ones. The Ocean's 11 bank heist, the
complex, multi-layered skill challenge.
Your bank heist.
Multi-location.
Maybe multi-location. How to prepare them. How to be ready as a DM to address the situation.
And we both come at this from different angles. But I am more inclined to think that yours is much more dexterous. You're able to move what you need to where you need it to be a lot more easily than me. My version is a lot more rigid. And it could be a lot more in depth, but it's so rigid that unless you hit all of these things, really, you won't find the nice little Easter eggs laid for you.
Yeah, for me, preparing a skill challenge, and I've only run a small handful of them in actual games, I like to brush in very broad strokes. Let's say it's a heist, or you are assassinating someone, or kidnapping someone.
Yeah, let's go with assassinating somebody.
Assassinate someone. You have to assassinate the mayor of the town. For me, I first talk to the players and get an idea of where they want to do it, since this is something that they can do in multiple locations.
Like how are you gonna? What kind of approaches are you thinking of? Are you guys on the same page yet about what you want to do? You guys need to kind of get a plan going. So let me know what your plan is, and they'll unfold this skill challenge for you.
So the first step is getting them thinking about how they want to address it. Now, at this moment, I've actually started the skill challenge, even though I've yet to tell them or make them roll a single dice. The reason for this is they are starting to formulate plans on what they want to do. And the whole assassination, the skill challenge, starts at the planning phase. But at this point, you don't need them to roll dice. The moment they go, well, we'd like to know, does he travel from his house to the mayoral office with guards? Now I go, okay, we have entered the skill challenge.
How would you like
to find that information out? What skill are you going to use?
Yeah, are you going to investigate and you're going to, I'm going to ask around and find the schedule from his, secretary or, something to that effect. Or are you going to use stealth and hide outside of his work and find out what time he leaves every day?
And those are great examples, but as the DM, you should just have some of those notes scribbled down.
Oh, no, I'm saying as a player, what are you going to do? You don't tell them that as a DM. You just...
No, from the DM side, you don't want to tell them, you don't want to guide them to the answer, because it's more fun for them to come up with something that sounds completely outside of the bounds of what it should be. But you can still bring some of those things in. For the assassination, maybe someone does a history check on the building in question to see if there's secret ways in. Now, you could do that with masonry, which is kind of an easier one in my opinion. But maybe there has been a history of attacks on the town and there's a secret escape tunnel.
Yeah, or there was a Prohibition era sometime in the past.
And this lets you take different approaches. Maybe someone's like, oh man, can I use Arcana? It doesn't seem like I can use Arcana on this. Actually, I'd like to use Arcana to see if any of the buildings are warded, or can I use Arcana to scry? And now...
Yeah, I was going to say, you don't have to have had that prepared at all in your system. In my system, if that wasn't prepared for, that would throw me for a loop. In yours, you just go, oh, actually, you know what? That sounds like a neat idea. Do I think it is or not? If it is, you make
I think when people ask about like spell abilities, because in theory, if you have a spell that could make a situation easier, be it fly, levitate, even mind control, I don't see a reason why a player can't use it in a skill challenge. I just wrap that up into either making a DC harder or easier. Let's say someone has
Arcana. Like if you didn't prepare for Arcana.
Well, I get that, but let's say you have a character that has the spell friend. And when you cast the spell on someone, it makes them more pliable to what you want. Afterwards, they'll know that you cast that spell on them. Now, I wouldn't just go, okay, you cast the spell. I'd go, well, what skill are you going to use with that spell? Are you going to use deception with it? Are you going to use persuasion, intimidation? Whichever one you decide to go with. But now, since you've added this modifier of a spell, I go, you know what? This is the perfect time for me to go, sure, you're going to use persuasion, and I'm going to go, cool. You cast friends on him beforehand, and you go in and you do your persuasion. Well, the DC, because now he's very pliable to use, much easier than it could have been.
Yeah, you facilitate the skill challenges with these bonuses based on spell abilities or things that your character can do, racial traits that you might have.
Certainly,
you could definitely a particular character. That's another thing about skill challenges. Two ways to approach. You can either do it to where one character can use any of his skills, but they have to be present at that particular part of the skill challenge. Or anybody in the party can use any player's skill once, even if they're not present. And that's a little bit of suspension of disbelief, but it also kind of works if they understand they're in a block-by-block skill challenge. Because if it's something because we keep using heist. Let's go back to heist. So it's something like heist, and one of the characters is like, well, I'm going to use my stealth to infiltrate into this office so I can steal the passcode while no one's looking and make a copy of it. Okay. And then another character wants to go, well, I want to get inside this vault area. I'm going to use acrobatics so that I can fit inside of this waiter's dummy.
Okay.
And then come out of it, flipping around laser beams and things like that. He can use the other guy's acrobatics because they know they're in an event, or would it be something you wouldn't want? How do you go about?
I don't think I would do that necessarily. I think by keeping the skills locked to the players, it gives more. What's that word we keep using?
Agency.
It gives more agency to the player in question. Because if you suddenly take the 9 or the 8.5 foot barbarian who can't barely touch his toes, and you use the nimble-ass elf's acrobatics roll for him to fold himself into a box,
right?
It doesn't just look ridiculous. When you go back and tell the story, it's a funny story instead of a cool story. And, I mean, that can definitely work. But at that point, I'd almost be like, I want this story to be funny because you rolled acrobatics. And then we get to see how you jumble fuck it.
Or, for people that are really open, right? Because there's DMs out there that are so open, they want the rule of cool 100% full throttle.
Okay.
Well, those people still do need to have a scaffolding system so that they can stay on track.
Sure.
Not so that they, prevent anything from happening, but so that they stay on track. You could do something like a skill challenge in that case, just to have the directions that you can go.
Maybe,
and then let them do that. But that would be something that, it would be hard to suspend disbelief. It would be something that's fantastical.
It would be more interesting. Like, let's take the example of the really big strong guy and the little nimble acrobatic guy. Is it more interesting to you when you say that the big guy uses the small guy's acrobatics roll to get folded up into a little box? Or is it more interesting for you to go, the big guy uses his athletic roll to essentially shot put the guy across a fence, and then later he gets to use his acrobatics for something else?
Yeah, there you go. Something like to that effect. Like, we know his acrobatics are solid enough to get this job done. Therefore, if you can get him in there with your athletics, then...
Again, I think that chains together more interestingly for me. So I see what you're saying, but at the same time, I think it takes away from it almost.
I'm on the fence as far as like how to use it still. Like, because there's like, I'm always learning or seeing new ways right now in my head to like go around how it could be used. What parts of the game can be utilized for.
I definitely see what you're saying there. I don't have enough experience with it to really speak with any degree of authority on it. But from what I've played around with outside of games, the ideas of it, I think I would go with keeping the skills locked to the players. But at the same time, like, let's say you're using stealth. You could use someone else's stealth and say that they're guiding the person through. So it's like the little stealthy guy trying to lead a big musclehead through a place stealthily. And that would make more sense to me. I'd probably raise the difficulty, but at the same time, it's the big crunk guy's action, but actually it's Jim, the little sneaky guy, who's sneaking him through.
Yeah, and that gives that player the access to the next level of skill challenge.
Sure.
Available. So, it's always hard to talk about, but character death.
Character death.
Yeah.
That is definitely, in my opinion, one of the hardest moments in the game.
One thing that binds us all together in pain as players.
Most of the time, yes. There are some DMs and even players that take a sadistic joy in either causing the death of players or watching other players die.
That's what we call a bad player death.
That is definitely a bad player death.
What I mean is that we all experience the loss of a creation or something like that. That's one bond that we have together when something we've created dies. Maybe not the DM so much.
Well, the DM has to run a lot of things that die. So, for the DM, it can be a little easier. But when someone important...
A big bad guy that's been pestering their troop the whole time.
Yeah, but for the DM, I think, when the minions die, when the chowder, when the meat dies, it's like, okay. But then when your figurehead that you've been harassing your party with, over and over again, when he dies, and then when he dies in an unepic manner where the players somehow pull it out and kill him in one or two shots, it's hard not to have it's hard not to sigh, but at the same time, you have to look at your players, and when all of them are cheering on the fact that they killed this big bad that's been a thorn in their side for the last 15 sessions, and they managed to ice him, you look at the players and they're like, they didn't get an epic fight, but they got an epic moment. But we're not talking about epic moments. We're talking about somber moments.
And so really, like, the types of death that exist in a role-playing game, there's a good handful, I'm sure. But I like to... The biggest ones I like to do are with agency and without agency, right? With agency means you took a part in your own death. But without agency, it means that you lost control of your own character in the game, and for a moment, your death was guaranteed, or it was you were a dead man walking.
Yeah, you were put in a sinking submarine. There was no way out. You couldn't change the scenario, and sometimes accidentally or on purpose, less so on purpose though. DMs can present situations like that. Maybe they overtuned a dungeon or overtuned just one encounter. Maybe they didn't take into account that your party isn't good at dealing with traps.
They said, you know what? This is a good time at CR for me to throw in a werewolf. Not that any of my characters have silver weapons.
Or the magics to hurt them, yeah.
So, for me, with agency, what ended up happening was you as a DM, and because I'm usually the player in our exchanges, right?
Sure.
So you as the DM, you've presented an opportunity in the story for me somewhere where I have the ability to die, or we were on a mission somewhere, and on that mission, we made decisions about how we were going to approach that mission, and those decisions were the agency I had. You said that you were having problems with character deaths and thinking that you robbed people of their characters. You were saying that as a DM, it kind of weighs on you when people are like, "Oh man, I really didn't have an option in my death." And I was telling you before because you said there was a bunch of missed rolls and things like that. I'm like, every one of those rolls is an opportunity. If you made the DC something possible, believable, okay, then it's something that gave them agents. They had the possibility to act on it. Their character in that roleplay world didn't notice it, didn't. So I don't think you should feel too guilty about it, personally.
Yeah, I can see your point. For me, I don't like causing character death. And that's not to say that I pussyfoot my encounters. The encounters I give are appropriate to the story. If I've told you there's a dragon in that hill, and you go, we're 3rd level, we can kill dragons, it's going to be a really sad night for you. If I tell you there's goblins in there, and you go, we're 3rd level, and you go in there, then you're probably going to have a pretty good night.
Well, that's the thing, too, though, is, like, I like to keep my world open, like, super open. And we discussed this before, about the idea that if you walk up to a lock and you're like, man, I want to pick this lock, and it's an area you're not supposed to be able to get to. But it's pre-designed, and I go, you know what? I know the DC in this lock is like a 25. So the chances of him hitting this are slim to nothing. And nat 20 roll. Well, I'm going to, as a DM, let the character know, because he might not know, the only way I was going to get that was in nat 20. He might think, well, I could have won that with 14. I'm a really good rogue. But when he gets in the area, if it's, he's a level 3, and these CRs, by my design, is 5, and I don't want them to get into this area and uncover these parts of the story that I've built yet, I can give them warnings to let them know they're in over their head.
Yeah.
And that way I can try to tailor or prevent that death before the combat encounter comes.
Sure.
In those particular
in that context, though, you have a story that could eventually lead them there. If I've been telling you from town to town that the Ember Hills is the home where Ember Drake, the ancient red dragon, lives, and everybody knows it, and then you still decide to go there, it's...
Well, this is the thing, though. If I'm 3rd level, and you got to go from a raw player, brand new to the game,
sure,
doesn't know the system, completely vanilla, you would think, well, my DM just told me 8 times about this dang dragon. I think I'm going to go get that dragon.
Okay.
So the real thing is, at some point in time, though, at a level 3 at least, you'd be like, actually, what you know about dragons is that they kill people that were heroes.
I would hope, if they found a reason for 8 different people to tell them about it, that at some point someone would have gone, do I know anything about dragons? And if none of them do, one of them turns to one of these people that has told them, oh, there's a dragon over there, rah, rah, that one of them goes, by the way, what is a dragon again? And
it's a thing that gobbles the avatars of gods.
Yeah, I mean...
What? Yeah.
It doesn't mean that the information given by this random person is good information. It just means...
But it can highlight these people who might not know, I shouldn't go do that because it will get me killed. Because, you don't want to put... You walk into an invisible wall, and you can't go into this range of hills. Why? Well, because I put a race of things that will kill you immediately.
Yeah, no, you don't want that. The other thing, just talking about it, maybe you want the party to walk in there to die, because it will teach 2 important lessons. One of those lessons is, shit can kill you. And if it's stronger than you, it will kill you.
Yeah, stakes.
The other side of it is, you can't win every fight. Sometimes retreat is the only option.
And that's the thing a lot of D&D groups don't do again, either. Is, like, I might have retreated like 6 times in my entire role-playing career. And, across, a little over a decade.
I believe a part of the problem there is that very rarely do you run into creatures that also run away.
Like, honestly speaking, right, with the goblins, we talked about this before. 8 goblins run at you. You kill 3 goblins in round 1. 5 goblins are running the other way.
Yeah, realistically, goblins, first off, any creature, no matter what it is, unless it's undead, wants to live. It may be doing dangerous things, but at the end of the day, it wants to go home to its goblin wife and kids, or it wants to go home to its manicore cubs.
Or its horde.
So, that's one thing to consider, and most of these creatures really only like to attack if they have an advantageous position. Generally, at least numbers, maybe even terrain. The moment that advantage is taken from them, or isn't as good as they thought it was, that's the perfect moment for them to disengage.
But instead, a lot of groups will keep throwing themselves at something, which I still think is agency if it leads to a player death.
It certainly is agency, but it is a situation that I think is sort of spawned by a mixture of the players thinking they can kill everything, and DMs who don't have their monsters react with any degree of realism to them.
But there's also, like, ones without agency, and some are acceptable.
Yeah, you walked into a trap of some sort.
Well, no, I mean, you're the one who walked without touching the trap. You had agency. What I mean is, if the plot was developed, and maybe your character's a centerpiece, and death it was the finality of that plot, that would be an acceptable non-agency death. If you wove a story so good that, like, hey, it's time for your character to step out of this.
Okay.
You know? And maybe even that player was like, I'm really ready to kind of move on from this character. And you weave a player death, where the player really doesn't have as much agency to decide how he dies, or if he decides to back away from that, or not die. The bad ones are when the player doesn't have any option. And the best example I have of this is a character I played that was young and annoying and grated some other party members. And literally, in the course of 30 minutes, he was charmed person into following a person who sold him into slavery, and then he got his head bashed in with a large rock by another person when he didn't have the ability to fight back.
Alright, you say there was no agency in it whatsoever, but there were probably moments where people told your character to shut up.
Yeah, but that's not the same thing. What it is, though, is another character wanted my character to be punished, or to negatively affect the way I was playing my character.
I think that comes back to the DM.
Yeah, and chose to do it through a spell. Now, when he originally put the spell on me, I don't believe there's any intent to kill my character, but the DM let the situation play out when I don't think I said but like 4 more things the whole time. And then I was dead. Those 4 things were the exact moments they needed to be to cause me to die. But there wasn't...
You know what this makes me... I'm sorry for cutting you off.
Yeah.
But you know what this makes me think of? We should do an entire segment on character voices and which ones you shouldn't do.
Yeah, most definitely. Because that's what caused that character
death. That is what caused that character death.
But
the character had no agency, but the player certainly did.
Yeah, the player had agency, but the character didn't have agency. And so it made me feel like no matter what choices I had made, this character was going to die.
Well, ultimately in that game, all of our agency got stolen because at the end of it, a giant demon ripped through a city that we could have never even had a chance to stop, and then we were all murdered.
Yeah, I think that was a great way to blow up a game. But the other deaths without agency are the ones that everybody hopes they don't have to see, which is everybody going murder hobo. And just killing all the other party members.
Murder hobo, a random pointless encounter that just squashes the party.
Yeah, the DM overbalances under misbalances the combat so incredibly that it's like you're 3 or 4 encounters above where you should be.
Or more.
Yeah. If that happens, and it's not a plot part where it was like, no, this is just the part where you're going to get captured and put into jail for the next part of the story. But even then, when you do stuff like that, it should have agency. Especially if any of the characters could die during the process.
So we've talked about the types of death at quite some length. My question to you right now is, as a player, when you find yourself in a situation where your character has died, How does that impact you? How do you move away from that situation? What's the next step?
Well, most people get pretty distraught sometimes, but I usually find that if I have agency, I feel like, no, my choices were the choices that led to this character's death. It feels fair and balanced to me. I actually am pretty satisfied usually. If there's like a really big mystery or thing that's open, it can be a bit dissatisfying, but honestly, I'll just try to create a character that has hooks that allows the DM to just throw me right back into that storyline in another perspective.
How long is the recovery period for you usually? Like, how long, when it happens, do you have to walk away from the table and just take a breath and then come back? Or is it better for you to take an entire week off, not off from the game, but the week in between the games?
Well, the worst time, I think, to have a character death is at the beginning of the session.
That is probably the worst.
Yeah, one person's sitting there twiddling thumb, like you said before, the whole time. And another thing is they don't really get their closure about it because, a bunch of stuff has happened since then. So, heck, the game might have transpired 2 more months. Look, the characters are half over it already. But if the player death happens at the end of the session, I find that, especially if it's really plot-driven, the thing about Shadowfell Forest, I remember. But if it's really plot-driven, then it feels to me like we can celebrate the death, have a little wake right after the session's over, remember the player, the good parts, and then you feel kind of refreshed and ready, inspired to move on to the next thing.
Okay, so the mentioning of the character is actually mourning the death of a friend. I'll be honest with you, in a lot of the games that I've run and played in, I rarely ever see that. I think that part of that is just some people got too caught up in the mechanics and not enough of the role-playing, and some of them just try to shrug it off so it doesn't become a hampering moment for their character because they don't like that.
One of your players, when we were on the Discord for the other game, said that, he was in that group of L5R you were in, where all the friendships broke up over the game. But that was literally over the death of an NPC.
Yeah.
And the mourning. When you roleplay it, it can be really strong and really big, and people can have problems with respecting of that issue, almost like a real thing. It's kind of neat to see players play through mourning.
It definitely can be. The situation you're talking about actually exploded that entire game, which was unfortunate. But the impact of that death, coupled with the fact that due to the story, the players were the ones forced to kill that NPC, really brought the hammer of the emotions and the ethical or moral quagmire of it all.
So what you're saying is it really brought it out when you actually took an NPC, or was it a DMPC?
It was a pure NPC. It was actually something that I picked up because one of the other players had a background that gave them a follower. So he didn't, unlike a DMPC that has a lot of interactions driven by his own goals, the only time this character interacted with the other players is when they sought him out. I didn't go out of my way to make him seek anyone
So they
out.
made these character bonds, but by taking that NPC then, and then giving the players the agency in his death, you made them more emotionally attached to it.
Definitely.
If the DM had killed the character in front of them when they didn't have a choice or say in the matter,
yeah,
it doesn't bring as much tension. Yeah.
No, that situation unfortunately brought too much drama.
Which is good. If you can find where that wellspring is and just kind of cap it down, that's great. But player death, like I said, when it's plot driven, like when it's part of an epic story itself, it becomes 10 times more acceptable. And I think it's really a DM's job to kind of try to tailor fit that. Yeah, kill combat. Make sure they can die in combat. That's still stakes, as long as you balance it right. And if they died because they were being foolish in combat, They ran away from their whole party. They're 3 levels into the dungeon, and they decide, well, the rest of my party's being kind of mean. I think I'm going to go away on my own and just explore this dungeon. Okay, you're probably going to die.
Probably.
And I'm not going to feel bad about it because
No.
you made the decision to walk away from all the people that, you're traveling with unsafely.
On the topic of plot-driven deaths, I have 2 examples that they're both great examples, but they highlight kind of different points of plot-driven death. So, in a game that I'm currently running, the party was dealing with a elven forest that was overrun or was starting to have a spillover from the Shadowfell, which is another episode we can talk about.
A dark fairy realm.
Kind of. Bad juju was coming into the forest. Let's just go with that.
Yeah.
And throughout making their way through this forest and investigating the situation, they ended up finding an old elven temple that had a mythal in it, which is a magical epicenter of power almost.
A ley line.
It was probably built on a ley line. And the problem is this thing had been corrupted. One of the characters made I think they actually critted the Arcana lore, or the Arcana roll to figure out what the hell the thing was. And they were like, oh shit, we found one of these? And then he explained to the party, these things are made so there's magical effects to help the area, to help the elves here. This one's been corrupted, which is super bad, and the only way to fix this situation is to sacrifice, like, a willing life to it. Now, they didn't have to do that.
They could have went and found somebody.
They could have found someone else. I also explained to them that the sacrifice of a very powerful magic item would be okay. Or, given its nature, over time, as long as you killed the major corrupting factor, it would eventually come back to where it was supposed to be. Now, that might not be how it's mechanically intended to be run, but that's what I did for my story. They go in and they kill the big bad in there. And they come back and they kind of have a discussion back and forth because they also had saved some orphans that the big bad was planning on sacrificing to further corrupt the thing. One of the party members goes, guys, I'm going to stay here and make sure nothing bad happens. You guys take the orphans back to town. The moment that they hash all of this out and they leave him some rations and stuff, the party leaves and he goes, all right, so Steve, you said the sacrifice of a life would purify this forest. My character feels that this is a good enough cause for me to sacrifice my life over. And then we went into a role-playing thing, and he had this closure for his character because he came to a moment that he was a druid. This was something his character passionately wanted to do. And it was a great moment. It gave them...
Give a character to remember for that player probably for the rest of his life.
Exactly. And that was it. That's in my opinion, the better of the 2 examples. So the next example, I wasn't the DM in this one. I was one of the players. We were in a seedy city. Our group was the remnants of I was about to say vampire. Wow. We were the remnants of a pirate crew. So we were all kind of ganged up gang members anyways, right? We get into this city, and we're trying to reestablish ourselves. We buy a little tavern. We start working on kind of getting control of our neighborhood. We transition from being pirates more to actually being a gang. And we end up finding out that on the other side of town, the people that took us out early on had establishment there. So immediately we just went down this line of we're going to start a gang war. And we pretty aggressively pushed that situation, and then we had to leave town to pursue another mission point, but one of our party members stayed behind. That character eventually got assassinated. Now, there wasn't anything he could do about it. It was a plot-driven death that we caused by starting a war with these people.
Did he want to stay? Did the other players force him, socially bully him to stay?
No, he made the decision. He was like, hey guys, I know you need to take care of this. So I'm going to stay here.
But what that does is, that's Sean Connery in The Untouchables, man.
No, it is. It definitely is.
That gives you... Because then all the other players that play in that game, for the rest of the game they play it stronger.
It definitely did do that. When we returned to our tavern, it was burnt down, and he was left on display. garroted and guts out. And we were like, oh.
Yeah.
It changed the entire scope of the game. We had two characters that were teetering from that good neutral line, and they were like, we can't do this anymore. And then the rest of us pretty much dropped to evil because we went from kind of a gang war to rolling frickin' alchemist fire under carts. It was bad. But it changed the feel of the game, and it was plot-driven. It was beautiful, and the players had it wasn't beautiful, it was horrendous, but we had a reaction to it. It turned us from being a mostly neutral party to vengeance-seeking almost lunatics.
Yeah, but super invested in the characters.
Super invested.
And you see, that's the thing, because without agency, you feel robbed. It's like
if someone had just gone into our tavern for no reason, burned it down,
while you were sleeping that night, since nobody was on guard watch, even though everything's been peaceful for no reason, I'm going to start the new campaign by murdering one of my player characters.
Yeah,
that's not a good device to create a new story. But there are some DMs who do that. They go, oh, I need a DS player. I know what I'll do. I'll kidnap or I'll kill a character, but I'm going to create a good reason for it. No. If you're killing the character and that's what you're setting out to do in the first place, no reason you can come up with. Because then you're not acting in good faith either as a DM to your player.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I was going to present an example where it'd be acceptable, but you've covered why that example would be acceptable. If I told you going in, you guys are part of a mercenary company and your beginning is going to be the fall of your mercenary company, and then I tell you that one of your characters is the commander of the mercenary company, there's a good chance that person's probably going to die.
Yeah, well, this is another thing. If you really wanted to, not to be deceitful to your own party, but understanding that player death can have a really insanely powerful impact on the connection that the other players have with their characters, with the game world, emotionally tuned level, you could plant players in order to knowingly ahead of time understand that their arc is going to be on a death arc of some sort.
You could do that.
As long as you're not being deceitful about it with the other players.
Honestly, if you're going to do it, as long as you present it in the lead up to the game, like not the day of the game. If we started talking a month ago, we're going to run this game.
I'm making my background for my character.
I tell you honestly, you've decided or you've been picked as the commander, and since we're playing the fall of your company,
would you be cool?
Are you cool with kind of creating this character, but then creating your actual character on the side? Because I'm going to present this moment where you're going to have a chance to survive, but it's a slim chance.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. At least that way you're giving the character a reason to be there for the first session other than a prop for the DM.
Sure. I've never done it, but I've seen it done, and I have to say the impact of that moment for the rest of those players, for where I saw it...
It drives stakes.
It drives stakes. The important part is, if you're going to start with your stakes at 110, that you don't suddenly,
back it off.
Back off of that. If you're going to start at 110, if you want that level of brutality to be there for the players, maintain it.
Yeah, same. Yeah, because if you can dip into that, but if you start the game at that, you kind of have to keep the game at a very dangerous level. So
we've talked about character death from the player's point of view, and now I kind of want to touch on it from a DM side. At moments we have, but just overall, for me, player death is always a very uncomfortable situation. If it happens too early, you kind of want to present a situation where that player can somehow continue to live out their story. But at the same time, once you open the door to that, you also kind of create a situation where the stakes that you presented kind of fall to the wayside. And that's a hard balance to keep. Either you're seen as a hard-ass DM who just, you died. Good luck. Next character. And then if you pussyfooted and you let people come back over and over again, it's like, we can die, but there's nothing that's going to happen because of it. We'll come back tomorrow.
Yeah. the idea that, oh, well, I can die, but not really. There'll always be something that saves me, that gives me the option to play the character. Now, you did that for one of my characters, who just happened to have the most horrible time in luck in a very brutal White Wolf world anyway. And it let my character live long enough that when I was ready to let the character die, the death was very good.
Which character was that?
The privy character. There's multiple times in that game you take 7 damage, you fall incapacitated, you die. Where I felt incapacitated, but it wasn't death, and I'm like, I know that damage was enough to drive me to death.
Okay,
But I didn't mind that. It was okay. It's just because it felt like such a brutal world that, like, no, this is coming. It's just you have a good sheer of luck.
It certainly did work for that story, but for that particular game, it was when we were a lot younger. It was in our teens, and we whirlwind gamed that. I think we were playing 4 nights a week, 5 nights a week, sometimes 7 nights a week, and on top of playing almost every day or every other day, we also played 6, 8, 9 hours of gaming.
Yeah, in a row with Mountain Dew and the ability to wake up the next day without feeling like I had a week's worth of sleep.
But the story in that kind of provoked me to do that, I guess. I don't have... I remember the key points to that game that were awesome. But my moment-to-moment memory of that game is hazy as hell. And White Wolf can be a brutal system.
Yeah, just like L5R. The brutal system, the stakes are always high. If you want a stakes high world, those are the worlds you go play. You play White Wolf, actually, specifically Hunter.
Hunter, for sure.
Where you're underpowered to the whole rest of the world. Or L5R, because L5R can kill you whenever. Or Battle Lords, if you also like math.
Yeah. No, but for those systems, I usually don't feel as bad about character death. In those systems, it's pretty much when we walk up to the door, it's presented to us, hey,
you might
life
die.
is cheap.
Yeah, you might die when you open this. That's just how this plays.
In games where death is a little harder, D&D, the Roll20 system in general, anywhere where it's Roll20, death is not necessarily an easy thing. And just to commit it.
Yeah. Well, when you have 78 health points instead of 7, the range of things that can kill you is a bit different. Like, there are things in the game that, no, this thing actually can't kill you. In L5R, you could be traveling for a decade as a samurai, and a peasant who pick up a sickle could very possibly kill you.
Yeah, he has a good chance.
You get a few bad rolls, and you get some good ones, and that's it. Doesn't matter. The guy with the sickle just killed you, even though you're a hero. But in D&D, it's like that guy with the sickle literally could swing at you while you're walking down the road and never come into contact with you.
Certainly. And D&D, for its own examples, has progressed over the years where back in the day there were a lot of save or die situations, and a lot of those are no longer...
Except for Beholder's Death Rays.
Well, it's not save or die, it's save and take no damage, or save and take damage, and if you hit 0, bye-bye birdie.
And how much damage is it?
The ones they were fighting was 13d6.
Okay,
that's
so save or die.
That's an enhanced version.
Yeah, save or die.
No, I mean, an average roll on 13d6 average. Let's say it's all threes. What's 13? That's 23... 39. At the level that they were at, all of them had more than 39 individual hit points. I think our lowest health pool is in the 70s.
But
he took 2 back to back. And the thing is, it is a D4 roll to see what you come up with. So it's not...
See, what you could have done instead was you could have sent 1 Beholder enhanced and 4 minions.
You're right. That would have been a very, very good moment to use minions. Unfortunately, I haven't presented minions to that particular party.
Yeah,
I've never used it.
Exactly. It's something to bring in, though. Now, you want to get the best features from each of the games if you can. Definitely. Like, if D&D ever loses the brutality of First Ed, then what do you really have?
Better D&D. But no, back to the deaths. The death we were just talking about. The death to the Beholder. That was a character that had been played for 2 years, had an unfinished story that not only the player, but I myself wanted to see the end of. And so I created a Deus Ex Machina that brought him back. And I paid for it in the story, but it's not the first time that I brought someone back from death.
Which takes stakes and drives them into the ground.
It drives the stakes into the ground. And the problem is, like, the first time I brought someone back, I knew, okay, I just wiped out my stakes. And then I spent about a year building up the concept of there are huge stakes. They've had important NPCs dropping around them. They are the cause of a very large war that a lot of people are dying in. And I built this moment, and then finally one of them dies. And I was like, oh, no, not really. Just kidding.
Yeah, and so what would you say, like, how are the biggest ways to avoid those temptations? Like, do you think is it acceptable to do that? I personally think it is, but you as a DM, do you think it's acceptable to do that? And if it is acceptable, how do you make it? You know, like, how is it that you make it acceptable to bring it back?
That is a difficult question to answer. The most recent one I brought back, even though it came with consequences that they haven't fully even experienced yet, it still ruined the feeling of stakes. And I don't know if I could have done that in any way that wouldn't have ruined that. Looking back at that moment, even with the costs I attached to it, I really do wish that I had just left him dead.
And when this death, so there was a portal at the place they were at.
Yes.
That portal was a portal to the bad guy's place.
Yes.
They wanted to find a way to use that portal, but they hadn't done anything with it, and they were hanging out around it for an extended period of time.
5 days.
5 days of just chilling around the portal.
Yes.
Raven familiars came through, or Crow, or whatever, and spied on them.
Raven familiars.
Okay. And some of the players spot them.
Some of them do.
And those players choose to withhold that information from the party.
One of them chose to withhold the information. The other players saw the Ravens, dealt with the situation, but didn't find the other players who were elsewhere within the building. Remember, they weren't all in one room.
They didn't attempt to find them?
They didn't. They figured, oh, we killed the thing spying on us, no problem. No harm, no foul.
Okay, so they didn't communicate it with the rest of the party.
They didn't communicate it with the rest of the party.
So, one of the things that caused that player's death, when the Beholder came in behind them and shot them, and they didn't really have much room to play there, was that there was party miscommunication. The idea that you guys have been playing for 2 years and that party, I'm surprised they're not dead before then.
I'll be honest with you, I'm surprised they've made it as far as they've made it as well.
Okay, so it gives you a good opportunity. Because now what you do is you have 2 characters who have had their characters reset, and 2 characters who haven't.
3, but yeah.
3, sorry, that haven't. So the 3 characters who haven't probably feel like when their character dies, it's only fair for them to get a new character. And the other characters, the ones who actually have had their character given back to them once, probably think that it ain't ever happening the second time. Like, they're more willing to think it wouldn't happen than it would.
Possibly,
for them to be resurrected. So, ideally, you want to find a way that... Okay, the party communication killed this character, but it wasn't that character's fault for the party communication. That party communication needs to be the lesson that's learned by the rest of the party. So a situation could be set up where if party communication doesn't work, someone's dead. If this other flaw that you guys keep messing with each other over happens, dead, and you use that to bring back the stakes, give those 3 players their due. Now everybody's beholden to something in the story. But at the same time, you've reset the ability to build stakes. You haven't built the stakes. They're back. They're still at 0, but they're technically at a faux number now. They're really non-existent. Because what's going to happen is if any of those three characters or players die, they're well within their right to be like, what do you mean you're not letting me bring them back? You let the other player bring them back.
They are within their right. And we kind of have had another character death, I guess you could say, since then. But this one would fall under that category of plot-driven. In their adventures within Skyhaven, they finally released a vampire lord. And through talking back and forth, they find out that he needs someone to sacrifice their life essence to him. And one of the characters that had not experienced a character death, freebie come back, now is back being kind of a faux vampire templated creature. So it wasn't a pure death in the context of you died and it just sucks.
But you cashed in your shit.
But you kind of cashed in your shit. And the only other player that hasn't really cashed that shit at this point is one that has retired 2 characters already.
So he's not worried about character death anyway.
No.
Okay, well that's really good. Is that
Smog.
That's Smog? Oh, Chris? He retires character, he's good with it?
His first character retired because his kind of pressing goal as they were going through the first arc was to kind of build an adventurers guild.
Yeah, that was that
character. And he achieved that. They made the money and the connections, and he's like, hey guys, it's been great. If you need something, come back and find me. But otherwise, I'm happy with where I'm at. And then his other character, I guess it was a death, was the one who sacrificed himself to the Shadowfell Forest situation. So far, the characters that have left memorable. The party are memorable, and they've left in a manner that, story-wise, has made sense. The only character he's gone through who was a short trip into the field was a bard that he made. That it just didn't mesh with everything going on.
Yeah, but sometimes it's okay to walk away from the character. Sometimes it's okay to have the player, allow the player to kill the character if he's, if it's really early in the game.
Sure, if it's early in the game.
Out,
Or if it's early in the character's introduction in the game. If the character isn't conducive to the party or isn't conducive to having fun.
Yeah, it's okay for the player to say, you know what, I'm sorry guys for investing this time, let me retry this again and come back at it.
Yeah. I will say, though, if you have a player who just kind of drops characters over and over again, especially if it doesn't have a story reason or any sensible reasoning at all, you might want to start hitting the brakes a little bit. Maybe start with, after 1 or 2, your next character's coming in a level lower. Just to give them the idea that maybe they should lock in on something and just try and have fun.
Well, it depends on the party and what everybody's wants and experiencing role-playing is. But, yeah, certainly, if you have somebody who's kind of like...
The moment they get bored of an idea,
yeah,
or a concept,
they have everybody. Yeah, they have everybody in the party that's playing with them invest in this reality of this character, invest in these things, and then they just go, okay, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah,
and then you have to integrate a new character into the party, which is a process, and then again go on, and you have to integrate a new character into the party, which is again. Now, with the storyline thing, it gives the character, when the character leaves, the other players walk away with something. They walk away with a piece of a story or a good emotion about it or things like that.
Definitely. Whereas, the thing we were referencing is someone who builds what they assume is a cool concept and then go, this is boring.
At the end of the session, yeah.
Yeah, they jump to a new thing or they jump to... And that is something you want to kind of
But
avoid.
walking away from a character or causing a character death because you're ready to move on, you go and you talk to your DM, at least for players. You go and talk to your DM and you go, look, man, I've been playing this for a while, and really, I just don't think this character would be adventuring anymore. I don't think that I like playing this particular character. I just don't enjoy this experience.
I do.
Can we write him out of the story, turn him into an NPC?
I see your point there, and I have had this happen a couple times in the game that I'm running, specifically with the player Koku. His character has gone through some traumatic ups and downs throughout his journey. One in particular, they came to a location where he could save his mother, but the cost was so high that he wasn't willing to pay it. And for about a week after that game, he kept coming to me and he's like, man, I really don't know if my character would be able to continue. Like, I think he would just dive himself into the idea of trying to research how he can find or, help her. I was like, okay, I definitely see your point. But then I also reminded him of everything else that character knew about the world and the going-ons of the world, because at the time, certain events had already taken place or had started that, although probably to him personally didn't overshadow his distress, it did overshadow the thought that right now I can just stop and only research this one thing.
Well, as a DM, though, you could go, well, that's really what you think your character could do, and then find some way in the back end of your plot to tie what that character... Because what you can do is go, oh, you want to put the character down for a little bit. You want to have the character be an NPC that goes off and researches stuff when you play a new character. So you allow that to happen, and then later in the back end of your game, you can bring that guy back as an NPC who has information that's so pertinent to the story.
I definitely could. And
this is a way of,
I wasn't trying to dissuade him entirely from dropping the character. The point of what I was saying there is that character in question was already very deeply involved in events that were causing world-spanning problems.
Well, I'm just saying, if he thought about it, though, and he said, no, seriously, though, he's just so obsessed and heart-torn that that's all he has. Had
he come back to me and honestly taken that extra time to really think about it, which I felt he never had done.
Oh, so he was just dissatisfied in the sense that the character goal set had changed based on his decision.
Sure, he felt like someone moved the field goal. Someone moved the goalposts. And now he was like, well, either I want to focus on getting back to that goalpost and ignore the other field that we were playing on. And I get it. Really, the situation was traumatic enough that if he wanted to retire, I would have let him. But with the way he talked about it, it felt like he took
He didn't want to retire. He wanted to stop.
The player wanted to retire. The character still had enough investment, not only in the group of people around him, because one of the plot points for his character, much earlier on, a scenario was presented where the entire party technically died. And a demon essentially said, hey, homie, sell me your soul, and I'll rewind this, and you can tell them how to do it right. And he did that. And now, all of a sudden, he was like, I'm going to abandon all the people that I sold my soul for this person that, although I've been told is my mother, I've never met.
The ultimate question, truly, though, is did you find a way that he was still having fun playing that character?
Definitely.
Okay, then that's the important part.
Because
if he couldn't have fun at the table playing that character, then you got to find a way.
No, in the next session he had fun.
So it was
for me.
His character's like depression. Kind of, he was like, oh, I don't want to have to deal with this. But once he got through it, and became better for it as far as character and player.
Definitely. And like you said, the situation, from my perspective, and I can be wrong. I'm wrong a lot. I actually am wrong more often than not. But from my point of view, my perception, his movement forward with that character was more important than him retiring the character. That was my opinion. Because he had a storyline he was pursuing that, honestly, I know he's having fun with it now, and he had fun with it immediately after he got into it. And he had just started the first steps on that story arc for his own character's development. Had another player in that game. He plays a character named Soren, and through a series of his own decisions, ended up committing a murder for power. And literally, about 5 seconds after he did the murder and it really sank into him what he had just done, he all of a sudden was like, oh shit, I think I'm going to retire this character. I can't live with what he did. And I was like, actually living with what he did is what's going to make you really fall in love with this character. It sounds like all I do is try to dissuade people.
Did he play? Did he?
He's still playing the character, and actually, the after effects, the aftershocks of that moment have led to him playing that character as a better person. He has resisted the urge to go the easy way, to take the easy path to power several times now. And every time it comes up, every time a situation of that nature comes up, he always finds himself referencing the moment. It's all he'll call it, the moment. He doesn't even want to talk about it.
Yeah, see, that gives a great thing of drama for your character to work with. And so again, the worst player death. If two players got together and decided, yeah, we're going to fight, and if one of us dies, that's the way this plays out, and we're both in agreement, and this isn't just us being heated, or two players who got into some kind of argument and playing as players, and then had it come out in characters, or some other bad player situation. No, they're like, you know what? Actually, we agreed, both of us, that our characters are at a point where there's an impasse, and neither of us want to leave this quest. And so we're going to put down and we're going to fight to the death. And if both players agree to it, that's still agency. That's still plot driving forward because it can change the emotion and tone of all the other players involved.
Definitely.
And if everybody's mature about it, you can have roleplay resentment that isn't actual resentment.
So it is an interesting topic that you bring up, and I like your insights into the PvP things. I also agree with you, John, that most DMs would not be very keen on PvP. There's a lot of times where you're trying to keep the flow of the game. You just aren't sure if players, or you've already determined that some of your players can't keep what is in the game separated from what's outside of the game. And me personally, I have had groups that are both ways. Actually, I've had more groups that'll take things personally outside, so I try to avoid those situations. Where we actually did have great success with situations like that, I think, is while we played White Wolf. And some of the experiences from that were very positive. I wish that some of that could have been translated to some of our other games. As a rule, though, generally speaking, from a DM standpoint, until I'm very confident of the maturity of my players, I don't think I would really try to entertain that particular mode of play.
Yeah, I think it takes a mature player to notice in those times that it's just a game.
Yeah, that can be rather difficult. So at this point, I think we've given a fair shake of minions, the skill challenges, and player deaths. There's certainly more things that can be covered within those. Given that this is our first time at trying to build a thing like this, we'll have some polishing to do to our content.
I'm sure if they want any more specifics in these categories, they can leave a comment and we'll go into them more either there or in the next episodes.
Yeah, definitely. Leave us a comment here on the YouTube, or you can look us up on Facebook or Twitter.
Also, we have an Instagram.
And all of those are going to be under the BullCritter's Corner. And if you look for us there, you leave us a message. Me and John are taking the time to check it at least once or twice a day. If you have any questions or thoughts on what we could cover, another topic that we could cover, we would gladly take any suggestions. So, with that, I'd say the party has killed all of the goblins. The heist was a stunning success. The dead, they've been mourned and interred. This is Steve
and John,
wishing you crits in all of your future adventures. Have a wonderful night.
Peace.